Welcome back, or welcome to our series on the history of Jewish Messianism. My name, if you don't already know me, is Ann Albert. I am the Klatt Family Director for Public Programs here at the Katz Center for Advanced Judaic Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. And I am really pleased to be here to moderate this fourth and final talk in this series. While the last few people are filing into the webinar, I'll just say a few words of introduction and thanks, and very briefly point to some programs that we have coming up after this series. So first of all, as always, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the Klatt family and the Harry Stern Family Foundation, to the Katz family, and to the rest of our board of advisors, friends of the Katz Center, and other donors. All of your support really matters. Wishing everybody a very, very happy Thanksgiving week. If you celebrate, I want to say that we are really grateful. Also grateful to my colleagues here at the Katz Center who work with me behind the scenes. I always say this can't be done alone. It really takes a team, and I'm really happy to be part of such a functional and collegial team. Okay, so looking ahead past today's program, next Tuesday, November 29th, we're going to return to public programs here in the webinar, but with the start of a totally different series, which will run through the first half of December and then pick up again in February and run for a good portion of the second semester. That series explores intersections and interactions between Jewish law and life and the US Constitution and, broadly speaking, the US legal system. So it begins with a talk by Noah Feldman of Harvard University on Jewish constitutional thinkers, trying to approach the question of what, if anything, is Jewish about their legal and constitutional thought. After that, we've got talks on Kiryas Yoel, on Jewish divorce law and American courts, on assisted reproduction, stereotypes about Jewish lawyers, the space for religion carved out by the idea of a church, in church and state, and much more. So these are all listed on our website. And a new element of this is for all the lawyers out there, those programs are eligible for continuing legal education credit through Penn Law School. So you can find information about that on our website. I just want to quickly mention our other programming. We do have two mini courses. These are 3-week-long seminars that take place in a small group. There's limited enrollment, so you're interacting directly with the instructor. The first one of those is in February with Sarah Zager, who's a Katz Center Fellow this year. Wonderful, wonderful teacher on gender and Jewish philosophy. So check that out if you're interested. And then in May, we'll have one on the modern evolution of halakha. Finally, if you're more history-minded, because you're here talking about the history of Jewish Messianism, we'll also go way, way back in time for a set of 3 talks spread across the spring semester on archaeology and ancient Jewish life in partnership with the Penn Museum. Okay, a couple of quick notes. This program is being recorded. It will go on YouTube along with our other public lectures, and there should be a link to the YouTube channel in the chat momentarily. As always, as we proceed through this hour, you are encouraged and very welcome to submit questions anytime using the Q&A button that should be in the bottom of your Zoom window, and then I'll moderate those by reading them to the speaker. Okay, so moving on. So in this series on the history of Jewish Messianism, we've already, of course, been on quite a journey. We've heard about messianic figures, movements, tropes, narratives, symbols, from the era of early Christianity through the 16th and even into the 17th century. Today, we're going to wrap up this series with attention to Sabbatai Tsvi, probably the most famous Jewish messianic figure after the period of early Christianity, whose movement began in that period, right, in the 17th century, but also had a long afterlife, sort of carrying over these elements of Jewish messianism into modernity and through the deep changes that modernity brought. To introduce today's speaker, I'm very, very excited and honored to have with us Hadar Feldman Samet. Hadar is an assistant professor in the Department of Jewish History at Tel Aviv University. She teaches and researches the history of Jews in the Islamic world, focusing on the study of the cultural practices and devotional lives of the Sephardi diaspora in the Ottoman Empire. and its multifaceted encounters with Muslim culture and society. Hadar only finished her dissertation a few years ago, but has really become one of the world's go-to experts on the Sabbatean movement. She's held fellowships, most notably, of course, here at the Cat Center, but also at Harvard and at Scholion at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She's published a great deal, especially about Sabbatean hymns and the interweaving of Jewish, Sufi, and other religious and cultural elements. And I am just so pleased to be hearing from you. Welcome, Hadar.
Hi, thank you for this introduction, Anne, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here, to be back at the Cat Center, even if only virtually. And also thanks to Diana and Brian and everyone who is involved in this event and all of you that came to listen today. So I'll start, and I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. So we gathered here to talk about one of the most outstanding and fascinating figures in Jewish history. And I want to start with two anecdotes. So you can see on the slide here, a post that was published in a Haredi, ultra-Orthodox website, which refers to Harav Steinman, Rabbi Steinman, saying that Bekarov Harav Steinman hu Melech HaMashiach, coming soon, Rabbi Steinman is King Messiah. So what's going on here? The post continues, and he is referred to, Harav Steinman, is Sabbatai Tsvi. So he's receiving here the honorific title Sabbatai Tsvi. And what is actually trying to be expressed here is that he has gained such a prominent role and almost kind of a godly, became kind of a godly figure within his community. And this is very clearly a derogatory reference to Rabbi Steinman. He was, he's no longer alive, but he was a very prominent, important, leading figure in the Haredi Lithuanian ultra-Orthodox society. And within the Haredi society, I picked just one example here, but we can find really numerous references to Sabbatai Tzvi and how he acts as a symbol of problematic issues within the religious order. So this is one example, and we're moving on to another one. And so here in this slide, we see just from the last summer, 2021 demonstrations that were held outside the house of now again, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the sign here says Netanyahu equals Sabbatai Tzvi. So when I showed this to my students, one of them just told me that she knows the guy who's holding the sign here, and he explained what he meant by holding this sign in this demonstration. So he says like this: Netanyahu makes a charismatic use of Jewish foundations to try to bring about revolution in the regime of the State of Israel. Sabbatai Tzvi's halachic antinomy is comparable to Netanyahu's struggle in the legal system. Both turned to some deeper system of meaning that was charged with national energies and threatened to devastate the social norm. So it's not important who the person is, maybe he doesn't want to be revealed, but it shows that there is this kind of public understanding or public image of Sabbatai Tzvi that sees his figure as, in the context of social political context, as a problematic figure, a charismatic figure that threatens, again, the social orders and brings about revolutionary ideas. So it can be in the Haredi world, it can be in the general Jewish society. And I could have given here many other contexts, by the way, also outside the Jewish world. And we will be discussing here the figure of Sabbatai Tzvi in his lifetime and beyond. And I cannot go through all the various attitudes, approaches in the study of the Sabbatean movement. I will only mention two central approaches, two central perspectives in regards to this movement. So it is widely agreed that the movement, the Sabbatean movement that evolved around the figure of Sabbatai Tzvi, was the largest and most impactful messianic movement in Jewish history. But the reasons for its success, it has received very extensive debates among historians and scholars of Jewish studies. So the two most prominent thoughts, ideas that are repeated or mentioned is one, the Cossack riots that were led by Khmelnytsky in 1648 and 49 against the Jews. That was a really traumatic event, and it is seen as a cause for the rise of the Sabbatean movement in a way. And the other thing that is again emphasized a lot is the spread of Lurianic Kabbalah. So these are two reasons that are mentioned again and again, but there are many others, and the scholar Yaakov Barnei counts more than 20 different causes that are mentioned as the causes for the rise of the Sabbatean movement. So this only shows that it is a very complex and problematic background to reconstruct. And it shows that the circumstances were indeed very multi-layered and multicultural. And we can point to many different ideas of why this movement was so significant, so powerful among Jews. What I find very, very significant are two developments in the past 2 decades or so in regards to the Sabbatean movement. One that emphasized the approach of Orientalism and shows that the study of the Sabbatean movement and the study of Sabbatai Tzvi was very much influenced by Orientalist approaches, meaning that it was studied very much in an Eurocentric perspective and with much regard to the Christian context and Christian affinities of the movement, but with disregard of the Muslim and Ottoman context. And I will explain in 2 minutes what I mean by the Ottoman context. So in the past 2 decades, really wonderful and fascinating new studies have dealt with this problematic Orientalistic approach and offered new insights to the study of Sabbatai Tzvi. An additional, and I think a very related and a valuable research raises doubt regarding to the centrality of Kabbalistic ideas in regards to the Sabbatean movement, meaning that perhaps understanding the Kabbalistic ideas, messianic ideas that involve esoteric teachings, maybe they are not that they're not important, but maybe they're not so central in understanding the phenomena as a whole. So why is that? Because most of the followers were not scholars, were maybe not even literate at all. And for them, these esoteric teachings, or messianic teachings, were probably not really so much accessible. So these perspectives, these new perspectives that kind of doubt the significance of the esoteric teachings, go to the social and cultural concrete realities. And among them, they emphasize a lot more the revolutionary practices, actual practices that were shaped by Sabbatai Tzvi, and then were shaping the behavior of his followers and their belief. So I will examine the revolutionary facets of Sabbatai Tzvi and the meanings attributed to them and to his figure, particularly as they are manifested in performative practices. Okay, and performative practices that were accessible to the wide audience and attractive to the wide audience. And these are always in the more immediate cultural context in which the Sabbatean movement developed. So Sabbatean practices as they relate to the cultural sphere as a way to decode the central aspect that made his messianic faith and way of religion so attractive, and posed an alternative understanding to traditional Judaism. So we will start. We started with the representations of the 21st century image of Sabbatai Tsvi, and now we will go back in time and go through the 3 M's that we have in the title of this talk. So Sabbatai Tsvi as a man, a Messiah, and a living myth. And I'm doing this general division as if there is a division, but actually we will see that doesn't mean that when he was widely accepted as a Messiah, he was no longer seen as a man, or that he was not yet seen as a mythical figure. So they're really intertwined, and this is a kind of artificial division that we will see is not really a division. So let's begin by saying a few words about the Ottoman Empire that I mentioned. And our story for the Jews, for most of the Ottoman Jews, starts with Sultan Bayezid II, who invited Jews who were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. And we can see, I hope you can see here on the map, different places the Jews went to settle after they were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. So they established various centers, and we are now going to focus on this city here, Izmir or Smyrna. Actually, it was not established from the beginning in the 15th century, but more towards the time that we are talking about, the 17th century. So from here starts our story about Sabbatai Tzvi, because Sabbatai Tzvi was born in Izmir and in 1626, and his actual date of birth is really significant because according to the tradition, he was born on the 9th of Av, okay, Tisha B'Av, which is a significant date in the Jewish tradition. Days of that are considered the days that the temples were destroyed, and the time that the Messiah is supposed to be born. So he was born in Tisha B'Av according to the tradition. So from a very early stage, he was a devoted student of Kabbalah. He went to yeshiva, and he was also became a rabbi. And around the age of 18, he also started performing some Kabbalistic practices. And they say, for example, that he was fasting during 6 days of the week, eating only on Shabbat, like from Shabbat to Shabbat, he was fasting. And so became a really Talmid Chacham, a very scholarly figure, according to some testimonies. In the same time, it seems like he maintained relations with Sufi dervishes. So Sufism is the esoteric teachings of Islam. And we don't know exactly to point when exactly he started his contacts with Sufis. It is very clear that he did have. So it's worth mentioning that at the same time that he was doing his religious Jewish studies, he also was in contact with his surroundings. In the year 1648, it's considered the first time that he had a kind of messianic vision. But it was then not something that became very widespread, and we can still not talk about a kind of movement at this point, but only a very close, limited circle of followers, of students. And with this idea in his mind, he started traveling around the Ottoman Empire. You can see in the background the map. He was going all over the Jewish centers in the Ottoman Empire. And he received, you could say in general, two kinds of responses. One is great enthusiasm, and people who wanted to hear what he had to say, who wanted to hear about his ideas of the redemptive age. And on the other hand, he created some really unease within the rabbinic authorities, and he was excommunicated in some places and was asked or forced even to leave some of the places that he came to. So there are, it's not clear when exactly, there was a kind of a ceremony of anointment referring here to the practice of anointing the Messiah, HaMashiach, which is supposed to be anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, the oil of anointment. So some traditions, Sabbatean traditions, talk about 1648 or 1658. In any case, it happened sometime around these years, and we have even, you can see here on the slide, the foreign reports about him and this practice of anointing him as the Messiah. Within these years that he was traveling around, one very important facet, which is in the core of and the heart of this talk, is his new performative practices, which are referred to as Ma'asim Zarim. We can translate it as strange acts, strange deeds, and I will mention a few central ones. So one of them was he explicitly saying the name of God, the 4 letters name Yehovah, which is not supposed to be pronounced explicitly, but he was going around and saying the name of God, which created a lot of anger among the Jews. Another thing, he was walking around the streets with a carriage, a baby carriage, and within it a fish that is symbolizing, for him, it was symbolizing the coming of the redemptive era. Maybe the most known and outrageous act that he was doing was when he came to the city of Salonika. He called the rabbis to his wedding, but his wedding, the wedding ceremony that he performed was with a Torah scroll, expressing here his love to the Torah and his total devotion and commitment, which of course the rabbis didn't like at all. And the last thing here that I mentioned is the fact that he was celebrating, at one point he celebrated in 1 week in the 3 festive events, Shloshet HaRegalim, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot. Okay, he was performing them, celebrating them in 1 week. 3 Jewish holidays that are supposed to be in different time of the year. So these practices were not received very well by his surroundings. During all this time that we talked about, this was still kind of let's say relatively little kind of movement, if we can call it a movement. You cannot really call it a movement. The movement actually starts with his meeting with Nathan of Gaza. Okay, so he was a rabbi, a Kabbalist, living at that time in Gaza, and he was known for being a healer of the soul. And like others, Sabbatai Tsvi, who had kind of a distress, approached him, and just previous to that, Nathan of Gaza had a vision that he saw that he's going to meet the Messiah of Israel. So when Sabbatai Tzvi came to him, he realized that this is the person that he saw in his vision as the Messiah of Israel. And from there, we can really talk about the beginning of the movement, the Messianic movement, with Sabbatai Tzvi as its Messiah. How did the movement spread so quickly and widely? So Nathan of Gaza was sending letters that were very broadly circulated and copied, and he was really, they reached many different communities that we will see on the map in a second. And in these letters, he was addressing both lay people and scholars. So maybe we can imagine, we don't know for sure that this kind of texts were read in some social events, or we don't know how exactly they were circulated so widely, but we know that they were accessible to different populations. And within his letters, for example, in the letter that we see here, the part that is more approachable to the common people, to the lay people, he says the following: a year from now, Sabbatai Tzvi will take domination from the Turkish Sultan without any war, through the hymns and praises he will utter. All the nations will be brought into submission. Okay, so what is he saying here? He refers to one of the maybe most known practice of Sabbatai Tzvi, his singing. And he's saying that his way of conquering the empire and the sultanate would be through his practice of singing, right? And it's kind of presumed by that this would bring about the revival of a Jewish kingdom or something like that he does not really elaborate about. This idea of singing is represented in other sources, which show that the most deep mystical secrets that Sabbatai Tzvi was revealed to and kind of was aiming to promote were through his singing, but not only just singing Holy of Holy song in foreign languages. So not necessarily in Hebrew, but rather in other languages. And this was seen as a way to mediate his ideas, his faith to the broader public. This can be seen in the most, I think maybe one of the most known scenes in the history of the Sabbatean movement, in a very scandalous event, which included very provocative actions. Sabbatai Tzvi, now we're talking about Izmir in 1665, okay, a few months after he met Nathan of Gaza, and he bursts with his group of believers, bursts into the Portuguese synagogue in Izmir and makes this whole scene where he threatens the rabbis of Izmir, of the synagogue, and declares his messianic idea. Within this scene, we see, according to the testimonies, that the peak of the event goes like this, and I'm quoting here the translation from the original. From here you went to the ark in which the scroll of the Torah is kept. He lifted the scroll in his arms and sang a Spanish song. Okay, so now he's singing a Spanish erotic song, very well known romanza. It is called the romanza, a genre that was widely kept within the Sephardic Jews that preserved this Jewish Spanish traditions. So he's singing to the Torah scroll as a lover to his beloved Torah, and the following to the mountain ascending, to the river while descending. Over there, Melizelda, the name of the girl I met, the daughter of the emperor. She was coming from the bath where she purified herself, her face shining like a sword, her brows like a steely arch, her lips to crawls were similar, and her flesh to milk alike. And it goes on describing her physical appearance and the singer's love to her. So in this context of the Shabbat ceremony in the synagogue, he does this provocative act of singing a Spanish love song to the Torah. Now, just to have a sense of what this might have sounded like, we will hear a few sounds from the, don't know exactly if he was singing it like this, but this is the way this Spanish romanza was preserved among Jews. So let's hear a few sounds of its performance by the very gifted singer Betty Klein. Okay, this is of course contemporary performance of the song. Stopping here, although it's really beautiful, but what I want to emphasize here is that he was taking, like really breaking the norms, the social code, by taking this song that is used in very mundane contexts or social events, and putting it into a very religious context and giving it religious meaning, right? Singing it to the Torah scroll, showing his devotion to God through the use of a Spanish mundane romanza. Why singing? We see it appearing again and again. Why did this become such a central practice for Sabbatai Tsvi that we see it again and again in so many different contexts? Why did this become his messianic practice, or at least one of his prominent messianic practices? So the meaning of the ritual practice of singing in the Ottoman context is really important to understand it. It started as a Sufi, again, the esoteric teachings of Islam, a Sufi practice that was seen as means to reach the divine, but actually it became something so mainstream in the Ottoman society that went beyond the Sufi context and was used, I mean, was the singing practice used in various like mainstream Islamic practices. And because of that, because it was so central in the surrounding Ottoman non-Jewish society, it also became very prominent in the Jewish Ottoman society. So singing as a practice, as a devotional practice, as a way of reaching the divine, connecting to the divine. In his context, it was so prominent, and thus it became part of his worship, messianic worship. And from him, it was passed to his devotees, to his followers. So we see during this the peak of the Sabbatean movement, massive public events in which there was singing and dancing, and with them also experiencing all kinds of mystical visions and prophecies. And we're talking about the masses, not Kabbalists, and not only Kabbalists and not only scholars, but really lay people, and we should mention not only men, but also women and even children participated in these practices. And in this period, where, as you remember, talking about 1665, the Sabbatean movement really became a global and mass movement. And this is the best map that I could find, but even it doesn't include all the Sabbatean centers that we know about from this area, from this era. So we have, you see, from North Africa, okay, the area of Morocco, and goes beyond this map to the area of Persia, and from the north, Hamburg and Amsterdam, and goes down even to areas we don't see in this map, to Yemen. So all around the Jewish world, there was enthusiasm in regards to the Messiah, and messianic centers were established. So this didn't last for such a long time, because the Ottoman authorities became a bit worried and arrested Sabbatai Tzvi. And we see here the Grand Vizier Kukurluf Fazil Ahmed Pasha, that was taking care for Sabbatai Tzvi to be arrested, imprisoned. And we have testimonies that within the time that he was in prison, still he was continuing his practices, as we can see from the testimony here. This is someone testifying about the time of Sabbatai Tzvi when he was in prison. So he says the following: I talked to people who had eaten and drank with him, and who had been with him in the fortress where he was imprisoned, but who were not among his believers. Whenever he was singing songs of praise to God, as he would do several times a day, it was impossible to look into his face, for it was like looking into fire. Many worthy people who had visited him have testified to this, and although they opposed him, yet they confirmed that this was the truth and the reason many believed in him. So he is describing here a multisensorial event in which both visually and auditorily, like the sonic, the sounds that were produced in these events that were going on regularly, several times a day, they were so powerful, so impactful, that even people who did not believe in him became believers. This strong position that he gained among so many communities that continued to visit him and to see him and to believe in him, and even the movement became stronger when he was imprisoned. So this was, again, posing a threat to the authority, and eventually in 1666, it was called to the palace of the Sultan and was given the choice between death and conversion to Islam. And surprisingly, to many, he converted to Islam. So Sabbatai Tzvi, the Messiah, believed in so many areas, so many communities in the Jewish world converted to Islam. How could the movement continue from there? So we see Jewish reactions to the conversion in three central ways: return to Jewish normative ways of organizing. So returning to normative Judaism. There were those who maintained the Sabbatean faith, and they continued to believe in Sabbatai Tzvi despite his conversion. And this is a kind of problematic group, because many of them we don't know exactly if they believed or not, because they continued their Jewish life, but secretly continued to believe in him. So even in this period, again, among those who continue to believe, we see in the testimony or the writings of Israel Chazan, which was someone close to him and to Nathan of Gaza, saying that in this time, the time of was referred to as the time of the nightingale. We're talking about time after he converted, okay, at the time of the nightingale. Nightingale, meaning that this was seen as a redemptive time. And the nightingale here symbolizes, again, the Messiah, Sabbatai Tsvi, who continues to sing in this period and sees the singing practice as even superior to praying. And not only that, but seen as the way to repair the world in God's kingdom. So nightingale as a symbol of the Messiah who sings to bring about redemption. Two groups. Now the third one were the ones who converted to Islam. They thought that if the Messiah converted, that's what was supposed to happen, and therefore they too have to convert. So in these years that he was, after he converted, for some time he was working, had a kind of a position with like good conditions within the palace. At a certain point, he was exiled to Ulcin, and there in the year 1676, he died. And here we can see a picture that I found online of this site in Ulcin. Today it's in Montenegro. One possible place, one possible site in which he is buried. It's also worth to mention that he died in Yom Kippur, okay, which means that considered in Jewish tradition that the righteous people would die in Yom Kippur. His death was considered by his followers as his hitalut, ascent to heaven, or concealment, hitalmut, that he is not there, but not as his death. Moving from there, what is exactly the Sabbatean movement at this period after he ascends or is being concealed or died, however we see it? So it's a really diverse phenomena after his death, and maybe instead of talking about one Sabbatean movement, we can talk about several movements, and we have some issues with the sources. Some sources, like we have a lot of external sources, external perspectives on the movement, which makes it very hard to see exactly what was going on there, what were the figures, who were the figures, and surely the numbers, but it was still dominant in the 18th century. And we're going to focus on one specific group, the Ma'aminim, with the time that we have the Ma'aminim, and as opposed to other followers in the following century or so, or several decades, that it's very hard to point exactly what is Sabbatean in their faith, in their way of living. But these, the Ma'aminim of Salonika, it is very clear that they continued to be his devotees. They continued to shape their life, their spiritual life, while he was in the center. So why do we have a picture of a fish here? We're talking about hundreds of families, several hundreds of families that converted after his passing, and they are referred in many different ways. I refer to them as the Ma'aminim, believers or faithful, the way they call themselves. They are called in several other names, and maybe the most known one is the Dönme, turncoats, which is a derogatory name in Turkish, meaning that they are unsincere. The carp here is because the Jews, some Jews call them Sazanikos. Sazan in Turkish means carp, and refers to their way of living, because officially after they converted to Islam, they were officially Muslims, but secretly maintaining this Sabbatean religion. And so like the carp who can swim in warm and cold water, they too were flexible in the identity they represented outside. So Salonikos Salonika. Why were they called like this? Because Salonika was their center, and we can see it here on the map, the more important city for the Sephardi diaspora after the expulsion. They had distinct communities and organization and religion, and they maintained this lingual mixture of Ladino, Hebrew, and at a certain point more and more Turkish. They had Turkish names, Muslim names, and hidden Jewish names. So all their communal life was in secret, but it was an open secret. So people knew that they were not exactly Jews and not, for sure, not exactly Muslims. So everybody knew, though they didn't know what exactly was going on inside the communities because they were secret. Okay, they kept it secret. So how could we know about their faith, their customs, their culture if it was kept so strictly in secrecy? We have their sources. So their sources were exposed mainly in the 20th century, and here we find all kinds of things about their life and their culture that we cannot know about from any other source. It gives us a glimpse to the function of Sabbatai Tsvi and his figure several generations after he does not is not part of their life, because most of these sources that we have are from the 19th century. So we have 100 years or more that almost don't have any sources, but these sources tell us a lot about the later developments of the movement. And we're going to now focus on one text and through it to see how the following generations of Sabbateans viewed Sabbatai Tzvi's figure, and how was his practice of ritual singing preserved and actually developed. So I'm going to sing one of the songs, not sing, but read one of the songs that I like most in this tradition. So this is one among hundreds, okay, hundreds of songs that we found in these manuscripts. I will sing it read it in the original language and then with the translation. Tu sos el Mashiach ben David Sela. Muptileim, muptileim, muptila. No vidi mas como tu, Chatan Kala. Muptileim, muptileim, muptila. You are the Messiah, son of David Sela. I'm in love, in love, in love. I have seen none like you, bride and groom. I'm in love, in love, in love. Vadai tu venistes con dos madrigot, adovistes a todos los olamot, tornadas a todos las sefirot, muptilim, muptilim, muptila. Certainly you came in two planes. You have repaired all of the worlds. You unified all of the sefirot. I'm in love, in love, in love. So we see here this combination that was developed in the later generations of Sabbateans. From the one hand, he's not only a Messiah, but a godly figure. He acts within the divine and he repairs the world, and he acts within the Sefirot, the emanations in the Kabbalistic tradition. But on the other hand, believers here expressed, they are in love. He's seen as an intimate beloved. So from his Spanish romanzas that he was singing as a lover to beloved, we move here to see this extensive use of Turkish songs. And here specifically this song was based on a Turkish love song that we can see from the title of the song in the manuscript. It says Bulbula Saruzu Shev Kerim Neva. And because we have the title, I could find the music of this song and we can get a sense of how they were performing this specific song when they were worshiping their Messiah. Let's hear a few sounds from this Turkish song, and you can see how different it is, I think, from the style from the Spanish romanza that he was singing. Okay, let's listen. stop here, although we could really continue with this. So as he was, his small revolution, or maybe not so small revolution, was using the popular songs of his time as means of worship and as means of communicating messianic ideas in the 19th century. So many decades after he's no longer there, what his followers, the Ma'aminim, were doing were integrating, but very explicitly integrating with music and the lyrics, the Ottoman love song or urban love songs of their time, the urban popular love songs of their time, integrating it within their worship. And this song here, the translation of the title, I make sound day and night like a nightingale, and it continues, I'm in love with you. Okay, and if we remember in his days that he was the nightingale, using here this metaphor of a lover to a beloved. Here in this period, in the 19th century, not only they're using Turkish love songs that mostly replace Spanish romances, but the Ma'aminim are becoming the bulbul, the nightingales, the lovers, and the Messiah is becoming the beloved. So in the first period, we see the Ma'aminim and the Messiah singing love songs, mainly to God. But with the time, and after he was no longer there physically, only physically, it changes. And within this love triangle, the Ma'aminim are becoming the lovers who sing songs of love to their Messiah. Fusing here the ideas of his divine figure with the idea of a very intimate beloved, we see the way they are redefining or reshaping his figure, not only as a living myth and a Messiah, but as an intimately known figure, beloved. And to conclude, we started with this timeline. We started with the 21st century contemporary representations of Sabbatai Tsvi, which emphasize his figure as a symbol of subversive actions or a threat to authority and to social orders. And then we went back in time to his days, in which indeed from the beginning of his public career, he destabilized the norms and crossed the acceptable behavior. And with his prominent singing practice that was used as means to manifest his messianic ideas in an accessible way and in the most charming way for his followers. And we ended with his most devoted devotees, the Ma'aminim in the 19th centuries, who after many generations, when he was physically not there, they maintained his presence through the practice that was so prominent to him and transformed his heritage together with the surrounding everyday culture, Muslim Ottoman culture. They transformed it to their own unique and innovative worship that preserved him as both the beloved man, Messiah, and the living myth. So thank you very much. And I'll end here and be happy to hear your questions.
Thank you so much, Hadar. If you stop sharing, we'll be able to see each other better. Okay, so we have a number of questions. We don't have a ton of time. I want to ask a little bit about Sabbatai and his movement, a little bit about the aftermath, and then a little bit about music. And maybe we can cover all those things. This is based on all the questions that have been submitted. So the first question somebody asked, it's kind of a basic question, but I wonder if you want to talk about it. It's why did Sabbatai Tsvi himself think that he was the Messiah? And I think a way of thinking about that question that might connect this also to our earlier talks is to think what elements of messianic traditions or expectations or stories from Jewish tradition was he picking up on? Like where did he see himself fitting in to that broader picture?
Okay, thank you for this question. Yeah, it's really a good question to ask. Like, where did he come up with this idea? So he had, according to the testimonies, according to the sources we have, he had a vision in which it was revealed to him that he was the Messiah. Because if we go according to Jewish traditions, he didn't really fit to the different functions that the Messiah was supposed to carry, and not the characteristics of a messianic figure. So it was between him, and we can see this as an ongoing theme in his life, between him and his God. Yeah, he received the message of God, even if it did not, and even maybe despite the fact that it did not relate to the known and established idea of a messianic figure in Jewish traditions. So this, if to say very shortly.
Thank you. That's helpful. And do you have the sense that Nathan of Gaza then worked to fit him more into those traditions, or did the movement just sort of come from the side and adopt a messianism that was of its age really different from the traditions that came before?
Yeah, so thank you. In the study of the Sabbatai movement, it is usually very I would say emphasize that Nathan of Gaza was the pushing force, and he was the one that really shaped the way that it was spread all over the Jewish world. And I think in past few years, his role, I mean Sabbatai Tzvi's role in shaping and establishing the movement is being considered more, which is a good development. But also with Nathan of Gaza, it's not like there is a reason that he's called a prophet. For him, it was a prophecy. Like he too had this vision of why Sabbatai Tzvi is the Messiah, and considering all these Kabbalistic ideas that were going on around in this era. Yeah, they offered a new way or innovative way of understanding what a Messiah should be, that does not follow necessarily the idea that was promoted for generations according to rabbinic authorities.
Okay, great. So we have some questions about the conversions that followed Sabbatai's conversion and the sort of long history of those groups. And since we're short on time, I'll make it an open question to you, what you want to take up. So one question is about an interesting, picking up on an interesting problem. This person asks, when people converted following him, were they converting to Islam, or were they converting to Sabbateanism or to a Sabbatean religion? And then following that, there are questions about, are there still Sabbatean followers today, right? Is there a longer history of these groups that we can trace now? And finally, if you want to talk about Frankism at all, there were some questions about Frankism.
Okay, great questions. So very easy to start with the first one. They converted to Islam. Officially, they became Muslims. They were seen officially, again, according to official authorities, to Muslims. Hiddenly, secretly, they developed and then maintained and continue to develop this religion of the Sabbatean religion, which for them was the true way of Judaism. So for them, it was not a different religion, but the true way of Judaism. and a longer history. Well, we ended kind of in the 19th century, but yes, of course, these communities, let's say like this, many descendants are have continued to be part of these communities. They went through this very aggressive process of secularization in the Turkish society, but they're not gone, and they still exist and have this kind of idea of interest in the past, and interest in their traditions. So,
all right. And should we skip Frankism for now, just because for lack of time? Or do you want to talk about the connection between Sabbatism and Frankism?
I mean, it's a fascinating topic of its own. It deserves a lot time to say about it. But I think this is one of the things that I tried to say to emphasize, that in the 18th century, there were various developments in the Jewish tradition in which we have to ask ourselves exactly, can we call this a Sabbatean movement, part of a Sabbatean movement, or is it something else? And it really relates to our topic of Sabbatai Tsvi as the central figure in these developments. And within the Frankist movement, we see that he plays some kind of role, but in a way, a marginal role in the movement. So it's a new movement, a new phenomena that is, of course, related, but also has its very particular features.
Thank you. That's a very helpful and clear way of thinking about that. If I can hold you for a couple more minutes, I want to ask the question about music, and then one more that's been submitted. So a couple of people asked really thoughtful questions about things that were going on in music, religious music in the early modern period. So one person asked if there's any scholarship connecting Sabbatai Tsvi with the earlier activities of Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, who also had a wandering ministry involving singing adapted secular songs, right? So I think a wider context of people of religious figures doing this kind of adaptation. And then the other person connecting with the music of Salomon Arossi and Judah of Modena, right? So that Jews were also doing new things with devotional music in the early modern period. So when you think about what Sabbatai was doing that was innovative, do you think of it as being against a backdrop of innovation musically or popularly in the Jewish and the broader world, or are you focused on him doing something that's quite unique?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the most relevant context to refer to in this historical phenomena would be, again, the Ottoman context. And first of all, in the Muslim society, but then also in the Jewish society. It doesn't mean that, the borders were not so strict. So Jews were traveling, and some ideas were traveling. But again, if we want to see how can we interpret it, how can we understand this, I think the immediate context is the most significant. So we find in the 17th century, in the Muslim world, this movement of religious renewal, in which such practices became more and more prominent, and therefore more and more problematic for religious authorities. This is on the one hand. And if we look at the Jewish context, after the expulsion from Spain and this renewal in the Jewish life, we also see a similar phenomena of adopting foreign songs and taking it into the Jewish spiritual life. but it was done in a different way. And I tried to stress that the fact that he was taking a secular song as it is and using it in a sacred context was different than what Jews were doing. And Jews were using the melodies, but they created different lyrics in Hebrew. They were also using Spanish songs, Spanish melodies, and Turkish melodies, and Arabic melodies, but they created Hebrew lyrics that were very, very clearly based on Jewish sources, Song of Songs, and other Jewish traditions. So, of course, there is a connection to what was done in the Jewish world, but also there was his kind of twist with these traditions and other traditions. I think that they're relevant, but again, let's first look at the most immediate context in which he was playing active.
Okay, that is very, very sensible. I'm going to press my luck and ask you one more, which is about gender and Sabbatai Tsvi. So one questioner points out that in some present day circles, Sabbatai Tsvi is being adopted as an icon of several kinds of subversion, notably along the lines of gender and sexuality. And they're asking about how did Sabbatai perform gender personally, and how do potentially different or subversive versions of gender play out in later Sabbatean contexts? I know that's a big question. Maybe you just gesture at it for us.
It's a really big question. It's there was an entire book written about it, and it deserves at least another additional book, because it's a big issue within the Sabbatean movement. So I will not go into all the issues of sexuality, which I think is a complicated and very sensitive issue within this phenomena, and probably what makes it for some people very attractive too. Maybe I'll just mention about his, and I will not go into, sorry, to his marriage he had several wives, and did that with her and didn't do that with her, and he married a prostitute. So I think all the juicy details maybe are quite known, or not known, but are easy to be approached in scholarship. Maybe I'll just say about his figure within, I think for me is very fascinating, within the following generations, that in these love songs that they are composing that are devoted to him, we see a very fascinating gender play, that he functions both as a female and as a male figure. So as a female, he is represented mainly by the Shekhinah, and as a male figure, he is represented in various masculine figures. And for them, it creates no problem. Like he can be both in the same time, male and female. And here too, I see it as very much related to the cultural context that they are acting in. So in the Turkish songs that inspired them, there is actually no explicit gender. And so they're taking this gender fluidity from their surroundings and putting into it the Kabbalistic concepts and gender plays that we find in Jewish tradition, Kabbalistic traditions from the Zohar and later. So this in regards to his the following generation and gender in the following generation. There's still a lot more to say about it.
There is so much more to say, but that was really very helpful. I want to thank you again for staying longer than we had asked you. That's very nice of you. And I want to thank everyone for being here with us. I hope to see many of you back a week from tomorrow for a very, very different, like could not be more different topic about US constitutional law. Hadar, Really, thank you again. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being here.